Okay, so now this part's a little more advanced understanding of HRV. This first slide here you can see is basically just a map out of like an EKG, like of a heart rate, somebody's like heartbeat, and you can see the interval. So even though the finger sensor, the iMORE finger sensor, will show you the heart rate at the top, which is, as you're probably familiar, that's just number of beats per minute. The heart rate variability is actually a measure of the interval or the average interval between consecutive heartbeats. So it's if you think about like your heart beating one beat, one beat, one beat, and you might think that a lot of people think that they should like just have a very steady heartbeat, that would be healthy. Well, it's actually just the opposite. You want to have a nice variability, a nice fluctuation in your heartbeat. And as an example, pacemakers, the old-fashioned pacemakers where you just had like one beat a second, that is basically a zero heart rate variability. Okay, why is it zero? Because the average interval between every consecutive heartbeat is always the same. So if you plot that on a histogram, you end up with just one bar. That's 1 second is the frequency. So basically, that's what the system is doing. It's creating, in this next slide here, you can see a histogram of what your heart rate is doing on average. So it's basically showing like the intervals between consecutive heartbeats. And on this graph, what you're seeing is that most of this person's heartbeats are, you can see at a heart rate of 70 beats a minute. So the interval between that would be a little less than a second. And you can see nobody's going to ever be exactly like one beat, one beat, one beat. There's always going to be a speeding up and a slowing down. And if you measure your pulse, you can kind of see this. And so it's kind of counterintuitive, but the greater the flexibility, or in this case, with this graph, the greater the spread of the graph, so it can even be more spread out than this, the more flexibility there is in your autonomic nervous system. So that's exactly what heart rate variability is a measure of. It's a measure of the health of your central nervous system, your autonomic nervous system, which is basically has two parts. Has the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic, we all kind of heard fight or flight, and that's, it's important. I mean, sometimes you do need sympathetic to get the adrenaline going if you're getting chased by a wild animal or something like that, or just you have to perform in a high performance situation. That added adrenaline and that autonomic component of the central nervous system kicks in, which means all the blood goes to your muscles. It gets away from the core and ready for movement, for motion, for activity, for performance, or sometimes just running or fighting for your life. The opposite end is the parasympathetic, and the parasympathetic is we can call it the rest, digest, and repair part of your autonomic nervous system. And that's very important. So that's going to happen while you're sleeping, while you're eating or after you're eating, when you're relaxed, when you're meditating. And we need kind of a nice balance. If we're too sympathetic, we end up with adrenal fatigue and we end up just in burnout mode where we just get burnt out being under stress all the time. But if you're too parasympathetic, you get kind of vegetative like a vegetable, and that's not healthy either. There's certain situations in the course of any day where you need to kind of get things done, where stress comes along, and then times where you can just slow down and relax. So that flexibility of your central nervous system is probably one of the most important parameters for good health. And the cool thing of the iMRS iMORE biofeedback, the little finger sensor here, is that when you put it on your finger and do your session, it is actually working with you to increase your heart rate variability. So over time, if you use this every day, you should notice that your heart rate variability is going to improve over time, which means that you're going to have a healthier central nervous system. And so how does it measure this? So the next slide here, there's basically 7 scores. So once you put the finger sensor on, and you're going to notice a little heartbeat in the upper right-hand corner, after a certain amount of time, the question mark will turn to one of these numbers. It'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And you don't have to really understand exactly why 1 is 5 beats a minute or lower, But this variation, you can think of category 1 as having a very low heart rate variability, which is not ideal, and category 7 is a very healthy high heart rate variability, which is very good. Now, there are applications on the market that HeartMath offers and other companies that are probably a little more accurate, so don't get all worked up if your score is low. It's kind of, I like to call it a relative heart rate variability score that takes you wherever you're at and takes you up to the next level. So don't worry about it too much if your numbers are starting off kind of low. And so as we saw, you do have to pick, really the only thing, this does put the system on autopilot, but the one thing that you do have to do is you have to select an initial time and intensity. So here on the screen, we just start with level 25 for 8 minutes. That's a good starting point. That's our basic recommendation. So when in doubt, just start with the basic protocols. And if you start with that, then what's going to happen when you put your finger sensor on and press start, it'll start calculating your heart rate variability score. And it might take 1 or 2 minutes, sometimes 3 minutes. And then a benchmark score will show up. But it needs at least another minute to get a second benchmark score, meaning it'll then get your first score. Let's say on this scale here, you're a 3. And then you're at level 25. It's going to keep you at level 25. And then it's going to get a next benchmark after, say, another minute. Maybe you're at category 5. So if you go up to category 5, the system will take you up 2 notches from level 25 to 50 to 100. Then it's going to calculate your heart rate variability, how it goes for that next 2 minutes. And if your score, let's say your score goes down to 3, then it's going to lower your heart rate, then it's going to lower the intensity down to 50. So basically, what's happening if you're not really following the technicalities here is that the system is raising the intensity up and down to mirror your heart rate variability. So it's trying to do everything it can to improve your heart rate variability score. But you see, sometimes by raising the intensity, your heart rate variability score goes down. So this is a great proof that more is not better. And we've seen this over and over again with people using the HRV biofeedback, is that when you just go right to 400, what happens is, I give the analogy of it's like a turtle in its shell. The body gets into defense mode when you're using an intensity that's too high. So these high intensity systems on the market are probably lowering your heart rate variability score, which is not a good thing at all. So this is such a big differentiating point between the iMRS and all other systems on the market. Nobody else, no other system in the US has this biofeedback component. And all you're getting are cookie cutter protocols that, at best will, give you some results, but they're certainly not custom tailored to what your body needs. Just a couple things I did forget to mention in the first part of the video when we were talking about the basic setup is that it is good or is important not to have the finger sensor in a bright light, because it is an infrared photo sensor. And it only works with the full body mat. That's also very important. I forgot to mention those points. Let's go and take a look at the next slides here. And like I said, here's on the display, you can see the score. In this case, it's 5. And so that's what you'll see on your screen. It might take, like I said, it might take 1 to 3 minutes for that question mark to turn into a number. But again, as long as there's a heartbeat when you put it on your finger and press start, just lay down and relax, because it's doing its thing, and you don't have to be constantly looking at the screen, because you're going to get a graph at the end that's going to go over this. And here's one example of a graph. It's the app analysis at the end. So the app analysis will basically, there's 2 parts to it. There's 2 y-axes. One, heart rate variability score, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. And that's the first part of the y-axis. You can see 1, 3, 5, and 7. And in between that would be 2, 4, and 6. And on the other side of the analysis is the intensity levels, from level sensitive to 10 to 50. You only see 10, 50, 150, 400. But in between those, lower than 10 is sensitive. Then there's 25, and there's also 100 and 200. But because there's not enough room on the graph. You only see the main kind of intervals there. And the little arrows pointing here are kind of turning points. So the first couple minutes, you can see the intensity is the solid bar, and the line that's going up and down is the relative heart rate variability score. So you can see after we started at level 50 in this case, which you can see it starts at level 50. If you look to the right y-axis, it goes for 2 minutes. Then it's got the first arrow there is the first benchmark score. So it's a 3. Now it's going to still keep you at level 50. And again, like I mentioned, you have to pick an intensity to start with. In this case, we started at 50. Most of the time, we start people at level 25. Now, it stays, and it's actually like 3 or 4 minutes go by here before another benchmark score is calculated, and it actually goes down to a 2 at the second arrow. So at the second arrow, the benchmark score goes down to 2. So what happens is the iMRS will lower the intensity to follow, because if the heart rate variability score goes down with a certain intensity, we need to lower the intensity because that was probably too much for the body. Another minute goes by and the score goes back up to 3. So now the body was ready for the higher intensity. So it goes back up to 50, and it stays the same for a couple minutes. The next arrow, you can see the score goes up to 4, and the intensity follows up to 100. Now a little point, why 7 intervals? Because there's basically 7 intensities that go from, 7 intensity intervals. There's sensitive, 100, sensitive 10, 25, 50, 100, 150, 200, 400. So those scores are raising the intensity up to correspond to the score, and raising it down to correspond. So at each of the arrows is a little turning point here, and all that's happening is if the person's heart rate variability score goes up, that means the body is ready for more energy, and it raises the intensity. Once it raises the intensity, if the score goes back down again, then that was enough at that intensity. And sometimes the graphs will be all over the place. They might even jump by 2 spots, because your score can go from, say, a 3 to a 7. And if that happened, you'd go right up to 400. Here's another, let's just do one more example here. And this is doing an 8-minute session, which a lot of people will probably just do an 8-minute session. And this analysis here, it took 3 minutes for it to get the first benchmark score, and the score was a 3. Now it's not going to notice that the intensity is still at, in this case we started at 25. The reason it doesn't change the intensity because we have to get one more benchmark to compare it to. So you need the first 2 benchmarks are needed for a comparison to take place before it's going to raise or lower the intensity. So at the 4-minute mark, you can see that the benchmark goes down a notch. So because it goes down, the iMRS will also lower the intensity down to follow. And then at 6 minutes, the benchmark score goes up, then the iMRS raises the intensity to follow. And at the 7-minute mark, and it's going to do this every minute, by the way, so you're going to get a very, very finely tuned, finely tailored session every time you use it. And at the 7-minute mark, it's going to actually it goes up 2 spots. Actually, no, 3 spots there. So it's going to raise the intensity 3 notches. So you can kind of get the picture that the heart rate variability is guiding the intensity to go up or down, with the end goal to be to maximize your heart rate variability score. And sometimes lowering the intensity is what raises the heart rate variability score. So again, more is not better. And this is, to me, one of the most important accessories to get with the iMRS, because it puts using the full body med on autopilot, and it takes all the guesswork out of using it. So definitely, I highly recommend making sure you get an iMORE with your system, and you can always get it later down the road. And if you don't get one, you got to use the basic protocols, the Wolfie's Law protocols, which are in the final video. But if you have this, it just basically takes care of the full body mat. You're basically putting your finger sensor on your finger, start at 8 minutes, level 25, or again, you can start a little higher if you want, because again, it's going to raise and lower for you to what your body needs. But we recommend starting at level 25 for 8 minutes. and just lay down and breathe. It's going to automatically detect what your body needs, and it just is so nice to have. Now, if you didn't follow all that, or if any of this is confusing, really all that you need to know is that the iMORE system is measuring the flexibility of your central nervous system. The intensities in the full body mat are getting raised and lowered to improve your heart rate variability or the central nervous system flexibility, to give you more. And what that does is it helps you to handle the stresses of life much better. It allows you to be more at ease, to be able to relax when you need to relax, and when you need to perform, and when you need to, like, say if you're at work and you got a big presentation coming up, it helps you to be at your best when you have to perform. Or if you're in danger, it helps you to get ready for fight or flight. And one last thing, I'm going to end with this. You get a different session every time, so this prevents habituation and acclimation, meaning diminishing returns don't set in. All the competitor brands with the cookie cutter protocols that you're just using every time you're gonna acclimate and habituate to that, so you get diminishing benefits over time. Because this is constantly varying things and mixing it up, it's kind of like P90X, if you ever saw or did that type of exercise program. The reason that exercise program was so successful with people is that you're doing different exercises all the time. And if you work out with weights, you know that it's called plateauing, where if you do the same exercise, the same routine, you plateau, your gains just stop. So that can happen we know it happens with drugs, with supplements, with pretty much anything you can do. So this is a huge added benefit, so that you don't habituate or acclimate or plateau with using the iMRS. Then you can use it every day the rest of your life without having to cycle or take a few days off or a week off, because you're getting that constant variation. And that variation is always to exactly what your body needs. So thank you for watching these videos. The next video will be on the iSLRS, light and sound system, and the final video will be just a wrap-up where we're going to go over a program to help get you on a schedule to where you can kind of follow a routine with some other added suggestions. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.